It's the story about Superman's death.
I thought you did those last summer.
No, not that story. This one was about 12 years later, and there wasn't a giant monster or anything, just the sun. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss All-Star Superman. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and it's AniMAYtion.
Woo.
This year, however, we will only have one episode of AniMAYtion, since our next big episode is episode 100, coming in 2 weeks, so that will take a spot in May. But I think for this one and only episode for AniMAYtion, we picked a good one to discuss. And speaking of picking a good one, she is the biggest reason I've been able to put an episode out each and every week, and the person who has supported me the most through all of these currently 99 episodes. My co-host today is my lovely wife, Bethany.
Aww.
That's all I get is an aw.
I don't know what to say.
All right. So we are talking about one of the quintessential Superman stories, and that is All-Star Superman. I think I already know the answer because you and I have tried to avoid discussing anything.
But I have a face that tells no lies.
Well, but I mean the answer to this question.
Oh, okay.
Had you ever heard of this prior to me asking you to read it and watch it?
Not really. I mean, I know you had talked about it a little bit and mentioned it in passing, but it was probably one of the stories that just blended in with other stories. So I don't remember anything specific about this one.
Yeah. So again, this is considered one of the greatest Superman stories ever written. It is a one-shot, so it's not connected to anything from the actual DC universe. So nothing that happens in this story has any effect on anything else Superman related.
Okay.
It's a contained story. What had happened with these All-Star, because there's also like an All-Star Batman and Robin. What had happened was DC pretty much just said, hey, we're going to take some of these big writers and we're just going to let them have full reign to do whatever they want with a character. And so for Superman, it was handed over to Grant Morrison, who is a Scottish comic book writer. He did the Final Crisis storyline. He's also the co-creator of Damian Wayne.
Oh, okay.
Batman's son. And then
the one that little weird cartoon was based on, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The Christmas thing. Yeah. And then the artwork went to another Scott artist named Frank Quitely. Now, that's not actually his real name. His real name is Vincent Degas or Degas. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce his last name, but he changed it because he was worried his family would find his work upsetting.
Oh.
And so he changed it to Frank Quitely, which is a play off of Quite Frankly.
Oh, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But I like that a lot.
Yeah. But the two of them have teamed up many times. They did the new X-Men. They've done Batman and Robin. Frank Quitely also has worked with another Scottish comic book creator, Mark Millar, on The Authority and Jupiter's Legacy. The Jupiter's Legacy, of course, being a short-lived Netflix series that got turned into. And then The Authority is going to be something that apparently Gunn has in his plans for his relaunch of the DC universe.
Oh, okay, that's exciting.
But All-Star Superman originally ran for 12 issues from November of 2006 to October of 2008. So we had 12 issues of this. Again, like I said, this is about Superman's death.
It's a slow death, though.
Yeah, but it's not that the big impactful as the death of Superman with the fight of Doomsday happening. This was more of Superman finds out he's dying, and it's what would Superman do if he knew he was dying.
He would probably just live like he was dying. He'd go skydiving. He'd go Rocky Mountain climbing. He'd go 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu.
Yeah, that could be problematic. All right. But of course, we're talking about the film. The film was released February 22nd of 2011, Directed by Sam Liu, who had done several of the animated films for DC. He had done Superman, Batman, Public Enemies, which is one of my favorites. He did Batman the Killing Joke, and he actually did The Death of Superman and The Reign of Superman more recently.
Yeah.
He's also worked for Marvel. He directed Hulk Versus and Planet Hulk. Again, Planet Hulk, another one of my favorites.
Right. That's one of the ones that I think you and Chad discussed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Chad and I have discussed Planet Hulk on this before. We still hope, even though Thor Ragnarok was kind of a loose adaptation, we still cross our fingers that they'll be able to do a Planet Hulk movie justice.
Yeah.
But the movie, of course, the story was written by Grant Morrison, but the screenplay for the animated movie was written by Dwayne McDuffie. I don't know if you've ever heard me mention his name on the show before.
Probably.
But so do you know who he is?
Not off the top of my head. Why don't you tell me?
So he is one of the founders of Milestone, which was the comic company that was created to really highlight minority comic book creators.
Yeah, no, I have a vague memory of this now.
And then it was later became part of DC. So probably the most famous character that you might be familiar with is Static Shock. That was the cartoon. So that was it. Unfortunately, Dwayne McDuffie passed away actually the day before this movie was released. He passed away on February 21st of 2011. This is one of his final projects. And I mean, again, we'll talk about this more when we kind of give our final decisions and all, but I'll just go ahead and say I think he did a great job taking Grant Morrison's work.
Oh yeah, and it's a very true adaptation.
Yeah, and finding a way to take 12 issues over the course of almost 2 years and condensing it down to a essentially like 70-minute movie. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's go ahead and get into the characters. We're going to start off, of course, with Superman himself, voiced by James Denton. If you are not familiar with James Denton, as I was not, he played Mike Delfino on Desperate Housewives, and he played Dr. Sam Radford on Good Witch, which means I still didn't know who he was.
Desperate Housewives came on after my bedtime when it was originally airing, and I don't know The Good Witch, do I?
You may not. I mean, I know what it is, but again, never. I think it came on Lifetime.
I'm thinking The Worst Witch. Never mind.
Yeah.
Good
Witch was a series, and I think it came on Lifetime. I'm not sure. But I did know Lois Lane.
I did too.
Voiced by Christina Hendricks, who Bethany is very familiar with as Joan Harris on Mad Men.
Yeah.
But she's been in several other things as well.
But that's what everyone knows her for.
Yeah. Then we have Lex Luthor, voiced by Anthony LaPena, who was Jack Malone on Without a Trace. That's what I mostly recognized him for. And then I totally forgot until I looked this up. He plays Mike Myers' best friend in the movie So I Married an Axe Murderer.
That was a fun movie.
And as soon as I looked that up, I was like, oh yeah, he did. I remember that now. Then Perry White, voiced by Lou, Ed Asner. Lou from the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
I love the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Or for our more our younger listeners, he's Santa in Elf.
Oh yeah, he is.
Yeah, that's Ed Asner. He is the voice of Perry White. Then we get Martha Kent, voiced by Frances Conroy. She was Ruth Fisher on 6 Feet Under. I did not know her from that, but then I found out what I did know her from. She was the ghost/housekeeper in season 1 of American Horror Story.
Oh, that was a scary season.
Yeah. So that was Martha. Then we got Jimmy Olsen, voiced by Matthew Gray Gubler, who is Dr. Spencer Reed on Criminal Minds.
Oh, yeah.
Or he's Simon in the Alvin and the Chipmunks movie.
No, he's the guy from Criminal Minds.
He is, though, Simon.
But he is the guy from Criminal Minds.
And although not a huge part of this movie, he is a bigger part of the comic. But I did want to mention Dr. Leo Quintum, voiced by Alexis Denisoff, who Bethany knows as Wesley on Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I was so excited. I heard his voice because I had to go and look up some of these characters because I was like, I know this voice from somewhere. And when I looked him up, I was like, oh, Wesley.
Yeah, Mr. Allison Hannigan.
Oh, that's right. They're married.
They are. Yep. So, what did you think about the voice work in this? Because this was kind of different from what you usually get with a Superman animated
I
feature.
liked them. I thought they fit really well. It, it was a good group. I thought I like Ed Asner's voice in anything. They're unique enough, and they sounded good.
Yeah. What was your take? Because the one, well, I'll go ahead and ask the question, and then we can talk about this.
Okay.
So, of these characters, and
Okay.
if there's one I did not mention, the others are kind of minor. But if there's one I did not mention, feel free to bring them up. But who do you want to see again, and who do you wish would crack like a glow stick?
Oh my god. Okay, so the character I would like to see more of is actually Jimmy Olsen.
Really?
He had like a fun little side story in the comic book that was cut, and I get why it was cut because it didn't really progress the story at all, but it was fun. And he had this it's like they cut it from the movie where he had this running column where it was like 24 hours a day in the life of.
Yeah.
And so he was, wearing these weird outfits and things to fit in to different lifestyles. And he was just kind of funny and silly. And I wish there was more of that in this story.
So probably the biggest moment of him from the comic that is not in the movie was when he has to become Doomsday.
Yes. And well, he's like Dr. Quintum for a day.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that part of it too.
And but that's the same story. Is then he ends up like having to call on Superman, and then he has to become Doomsday and order,
because Superman kind of goes evil for a little bit, and so Jimmy has to take a formula that pretty much gives him Doomsday's abilities,
right?
And turns him into a Doomsday-looking creature, and he has to fight off Superman until Superman regains his senses,
right?
And so a little bit more Jimmy. Okay,
yeah, I would like a little bit more Jimmy. The character I would like to see crack like a glow stick, I guess you could say, is Samson and Atlas.
Okay,
they were super frustrating. They weren't super necessary, in my opinion. I think you could have, and I hated the really toxic story of them fighting over Lois, and it was kind of just played off of just like, oh, ha ha, so silly, blah blah. No, it's gross. Shut up.
Yeah.
Get away.
Yeah, little problematic there, but especially with a character like Lois.
Yeah. And it was just gross. It gave me the icks, and I didn't like it. So get them out of here.
All right. So for me, I actually would like to see more of this version of Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Anthony LaPena.
He did a really good job.
Gave this a whole different. I mean, I love Clancy Brown from the animated series and Justice League. He's the voice I think I hear in my head when I read a lot of Lex Luthor. And of course, live action, Michael Rosenbaum is one of my favorites.
The GOAT.
But there is something about the way that Anthony LaPena brings this Lex Luthor
and the like concentrated, focused rage.
Yeah, you can tell he really brings that intelligence of Luthor, that you can tell he's always thinking, but then the fact that he's also so self-absorbed.
Yeah.
And he does a great job at bringing that out and making Lex a very multi-leveled character,
right?
Which he really is.
It made him not a sympathetic villain, I would say, but a villain where you understood his motivations a lot better than I think I normally do when Lex Luthor is presented. Like, other than him just being like a rich megalomaniac, what is Luthor's motivations? This you at least go like, okay, like, I don't agree with you, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, the character, movie-wise, the character I could have done without was actually Parasite. I get the purpose of him in the story and all, but there was just something about it's just I don't know. The scene just almost goes a little too long.
Yeah.
And
I do think that scene played out a little bit better in the comic book.
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If I'm talking about the movie, I'd probably do away or just cut back on the parasite stuff.
Right.
A little bit. It didn't work for me as well.
Now playing on a cell phone near you. A show for all the manly men out there, where guys talk about their favorite movies and what they can teach us about being a man. Featuring the coolest guests.
Murder somebody is not like killing an ant.
The most gratifying laughs.
It's Tombstone, what can I say?
Yeah.
And a fresh take on movies like you've never heard before.
This will be the thing that gets written on his proverbial tombstone.
We aren't here to criticize the movies you love, but to praise them for how they apply to our lives as husbands, fathers, and really all men in general. So buckle up your seatbelts, because Manly Movies is here. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast catcher. And remember, man up.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels as best we can. And the first thing I want to ask you is, in the comic, it is constantly talking about Superman performing his 12 labors.
Right.
Did you ever actually pick up on what his 12 labors were?
Vaguely. I mean, sometimes there were certain parts where I was like, oh, okay, I see where that's this. But, I mean, it was kind of pretty much Hercules' 12 labors, right?
Vaguely. Vaguely. So, I don't think they make it clear in the comic. And, of course, in the movie, they just kind of scrap that whole idea altogether. There's kind of a reference to it, I think, with Atlas and Samson.
Yeah.
Of him performing these great feats. But I did find out what they were intended to be. So labor number 1 was the opening of the comic, saving the mission to the sun. That was labor number 1. And he unveils the new power, where he can kind of let his solar radiation kind of expand out. And of course, that's also where he gets the radiation poisoning.
The inciting incident, if you will.
Because for those of you who don't know this story, Superman, of course, his powers come from the sun. But what happens here is he gets so close to the sun.
He kind of Icarused himself.
Yeah, that his cells absorb way too much, more than they can handle. And so essentially his body is breaking down. Without trying not to make this sound like I'm downgrading cancer, but this is essentially Superman getting cancer.
Oh,
is what it is, because it is his body is breaking down. His cells are being destroyed by this solar radiation.
And that was that, like, the author came out and pretty much explicitly said that, or is that just kind of what you picked up on?
No, that's just kind of the way I've always interpreted it.
Okay.
Is that but again, that was his first of the 12 labors, was saving the mission to the sun. The second was the super elixir, pretty much coming up with the formula that would turn any normal person into Superman.
Right.
Which he gives to Lois for her birthday.
Okay.
Third being the unanswerable question.
Yeah. So
you have that. I want to talk about that one for a minute. So what did you think about the fact that technically in the movie really plays this out? Superman didn't actually answer it.
No.
Lex did.
Yeah. Yes, he does. But I did not pick that up in the comic. They made it more explicit in the movie. But I don't know. It's not my favorite, but I kind of like the idea that, with his solar radiation, it's given him this extra, he said, like, it's given him this extra ability to think. He thinks better. And to hear that, actually he just read it somewhere.
Well, he had read it just moments before, because it was on the back of the newspaper that Samson had shown him, stating about the death of Superman. And then Superman recalls that on the back, it's literally...
It's like an ad.
It's an ad for a car that Lex
has invented.
Lex sells, yeah. And it literally has that question, what happens when the irresistible force meets the immovable object? And then underneath it says surrender to the, whatever the name of the vehicle is. I don't think that is anywhere in the comic. So I was very curious what your thought was on the fact that essentially the movie's saying, Lex is actually the one who solves the answer.
Well, then if you want to look at it, Lex is also the reason for Lex knew that when he would save the mission to the sun. And so he caused that. Lex also invents his own super elixir.
Well, no, that he steals.
Oh,
because
that's
remember,
right. You're right.
He programs the 7 robot that works for Superman.
You're right.
And he steals the formula.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Scrap that thesis.
Then the 4th labor is not in the movie at all.
Yeah.
That is the chaining of the chronovore. So that's in the comic book. That's the scene that happens in Smallville, where Superman teams up with the future Superman, 2 Supermen.
So it's like young Clark Kent teams up with himself and...
Yeah, so it is revealed that the unknown Superman
with
the question
that
mark.
Story. I hated that got cut.
Which I'm going to come back to the unknown Superman.
Yeah.
But then he also teams up with Cal Kent, a descendant of himself. And then he teams up with a 5th dimensional version of Superman. It's kind of like a Mr. Mxyzptlk version of Superman. And then they have to battle off this thing called the Chronovore, which...
drains color?
Well, so, I mean, it's
Where
pretty much...
ages it.
Yeah.
That's
But really the point of that story in the comic is they are coming to try to do the job themselves because they know if Superman does it, Clark does it, he is not going to be there when Jonathan dies.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, it's then revealed that the unknown Superman is just an older version of Clark. And so he's trying to make it so that Clark could be there.
Right.
Which, of course, it doesn't happen because Clark is who he is.
Yeah.
He's the one that is going to save
to
the
be
day.
there also.
Yeah. But then he suddenly realizes that he can no longer hear his father's heartbeat. Yeah. I mean, that got me in the comic. It's getting me now talking about it. I get that it wasn't in the movie.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed that story because it had the nice bow at the end where the Clark, the Superman of our timeline, did get to see Jonathan and did get to tell him goodbye and did get to be there when he died, which I thought was kind of a nice, like I said, kind of a bow to that story of just, it can't be perfect, but it can be something.
Yeah. And the movie at least has a moment where he goes to visit his dad's grave, and then he has the moment with Martha. So I mean, they do get to have kind of a version of that touching family moment. But again, I got why that whole scene was taken out of the movie. And we'll talk a little bit more about the comic in a moment, but we're going to get through these labors. Next up was Saving Earth from Bizarro World, which was your least favorite part of the comic. And of course, that also completely cut from the movie.
Thank goodness.
Which again, I totally understood. I was fine with it.
It wasn't, okay. To put into words how I felt about it, I had trouble reading the Bizarro language.
Yeah.
And it made it difficult for me to follow the story to try to figure out what was happening. And I just, at a certain point, I was like, I don't care. This isn't moving the story forward. I don't want to invest this much brain power into this story.
Well, again, it was where Grant Morrison was again. He was taking decades worth of Superman mythology and trying to tell his own version of it. Okay. And of course, in this one, the Bizarro was a race of people from this other underworld type thing, or underverse, as they call it, that pretty much when they come in contact with another species, they kind of become that. And that was kind of how they explained it and all. And then they had to throw in... but to make it a little bit easier, they had to throw in the character of Zabaro.
Yeah, who is the Bizarro Superman.
Yeah. that way he could speak normally.
He was the hat on top of the hat.
Yeah. And then there was the whole confusing thing to me about how they could only survive until the next day, and then they started all over. There was like something.
I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you.
And then the next labor is Superman returns from the Underverse. So again, you do have those kind of connections with Hercules, like you were talking about. Hercules returning.
There's a lot of Greek mythology
from Hades in there. Now, a moment that I actually kind of wish they could have thrown in some way into the movie was the next labor was Superman creating life.
Right.
Which he does through what is called Earth Q.
That was really cool.
And my favorite part of it, which I kind of is why I wish they could have found some of it, is you end up seeing in Earth Q, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel getting the idea of Superman.
Right. And writing the comic.
Yes. Which I love. Essentially the idea that Superman created himself.
Right.
Is what that is. So yeah, there is that. Next we've got him liberating Kandor and cures cancer. For some reason Grant Morrison put those two together as one labor. We do get a little bit of that. We get a throwaway line about the liberating Kandor in the movie. He just talks about, I found a
place
for them, and he takes.
It's gonna take me 3 weeks to get there and back.
But we don't actually see. We don't see a lot of the Kandor stuff that is in the comic where Superman, Quentin actually shrinks down and goes into Kandor. We don't see all that stuff, but I was okay with all that.
Quentin's just not in it as much.
He's not, yeah.
Like, he is a strange character in the comic, and that, like, I had never heard of that character before. I don't know if he existed before this comic. No,
to my knowledge, Leo Quentin was made just for this story.
Well, because he's pretty much in every single story.
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form. And then the cures cancer. I'll be honest, it's kind of a throwaway line, even in the comic.
Yeah,
that Superman has cured.
Also fixed it. Yeah, and got it.
Childhood cancer or child cancer is what I think they specifically say. Is that he's cured cancer in children.
Well, it's like a child in the children's ward, right?
Yeah, it's something like that. All right, then next up we've got the fact that he defeats Solaris, who comes out of nowhere in the comic book, and even more so comes out of nowhere in the movie. There is a lot about and we can talk about this now. I plan to bring it up later, but there's a lot we can talk about that. There's a lot of randomness to this story.
It felt very jerky.
Yeah. A lot of randomness and a lot of just all of a sudden this is now happening and all of a sudden this thing is now here. And I think Solaris is the one thing that Dwayne McDuffie couldn't quite figure out a way to transition to him.
He couldn't make it work naturally, so he figured, let's just do it.
Yeah, it's just okay. Here we go. There's this robot sun, tyrant sun that is out there turning the world red, but then blue and. Yeah.
Well, he poisons the sun.
Eventually he originally turns everything red because that's to take the power away from Superman because he's working with Lex. Then we find out that he actually tricked Lex and he has poisoned the sun, which has turned it blue. And then that's what leads to our big finale.
Right.
But before we get to that finale, Superman actually dies. He's Clark Kent at the moment. He realizes he's about to succumb to his illness. He becomes Clark Kent, rushes back into the Daily Planet because he's got to write the story about Superman's death.
Right.
And then he dies what they believe is of a heart attack. The people in the Daily Planet. And this happens in the comic and in the movie. But the comic then actually, and you want to talk about one of those just quick, all of a sudden we're somewhere else.
Yeah.
we actually get to see the afterlife, where Superman spends a little bit of time with his Kryptonian father,
Right.
Jor-El, and then Jor-El ends up telling him, you're not supposed to be here yet, and then sends him back, which to me gave a little bit more of the heroic return, heroic comeback,
Right.
than the movie where he collapses, Super Lex shows up, and then he
he's
just
like,
wakes
oh,
back
sorry,
up.
not dead yet.
He just wakes back up, Lois, and then wakes back up. So,
Yeah.
But conquering death was the 10th labor. Then the 11th is builds an artificial heart for the sun. So that is our big big finale, if you will, that Superman, about to essentially explode with solar radiation, decides to fly directly into the sun to
Fix it.
reignite the sun and undo everything that Solaris did. So essentially he saves the world. And then the 12th labor is that he leaves the formula, which I assume you go back to Super Elixir in a way here, but he leaves the formula for them to make Superman 2, which the comic book literally ends with a panel of Superman's logo, but with, instead of the S, it is the number 2.
Right.
Which I am so glad they did not do in the movie, because that is the cheesiest part of the comic, if you ask me.
And that's saying something, because there's some really cheesy parts in this book.
Yeah. Again, I think Dwayne McDuffie does a great job. He takes Grant Morrison's words. He almost uses them verbatim.
Yes.
There's a couple of changes here, a couple of changes there.
He trims a lot for, pacing, which...
But you really could, almost follow along in
Yeah.
a lot of the scenes with the almost the exact dialogue from the comic. I didn't pay, there's always several animators. There's not just a single animator when it comes to a motion picture. But I think that the animation matched pretty well as well with Quitely's illustrations.
Oh, yeah. It was almost like a shot for shot.
Yeah. Again, there was some, the iconic scene of Superman and Lois kissing on the moon with the Earth behind them. I mean, that was just a
even when
panel.
The Sphinx has her in that, Schrodinger's cat moment.
Yeah. Not alive, but not dead. She
Right.
was both alive and dead at the same time. Yeah, so there's some great scenes. Again, the animation, I will say, is a little bit, I guess the word would be smoother, but that's not a diss on Quitely's. Quitely's is just so detailed.
Yeah.
That it's hard to put that into animation.
Yes.
So they did smooth out some of the looks just for the animation to look better. Because Quitely's illustrations in the comic are just, extremely detailed. You're seeing every line on Superman's face. It's a beautiful comic. But again, they did a great job matching it up for the animation. I brought this up earlier, but I ultimately think that Luthor's story is the best part.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Yeah.
Again, some of the words are changed, but it's a great story.
You really get to see an arc with Lex Luthor.
Yeah. And that's what I think with
that has a very satisfying resolution.
Yeah, with doing the way that McDuffie did with the script, he really is able to give us a Lex who is extremely intelligent, but also extremely blinded by his own arrogance.
Right.
And I honestly think McDuffie does a better job at telling that story than, I'll be honest, than Grant Morrison did. That's just my opinion.
Right.
But I think in both cases, I love especially the prison scene where he's interviewing Lex.
Yes.
Of the fact that Clark is right there in front of him. Clark at one point, saves Lex from being electrocuted.
Right.
He, of course, protects Lex from an inmate shooting him during the riot. He is, of course, protecting Lex from Parasite the whole time. At one point, his glasses fall off, and you think Lex sees him without the glasses falling off. But the fact that he is so blinded by his arrogance and how lowly he respects Clark, but how lowly he thinks of him as a human being.
Right.
He does not see that Clark is Superman.
Right. It's a very comical scene in that regard because yeah, like you said, he's so full of himself and so full of his self-righteousness that he doesn't pay attention to the fact that there are so many clues that if you just paid attention.
Oh yeah. And then it's funny too that you've got Lois, who he flat out tells that he's Superman, and Lois just refuses to believe it.
Yeah. Does she ever actually believe it?
I don't think she does, to be honest. I really don't. I do not think she does. But one of my favorite things is McDuffie changes one line. I can't remember the exact line in the comic, but I do know it is changed in the movie where he calls Clark a parody of a man.
That's funny.
And those were not the words from the comic. But I think, again, that was McDuffie doing a great job of, really telling that story between Lex and Clark and Superman, whatever you want to say it among that. But even going back to what we talked about, the Ultra Phoenix Sphinx's question, the fact that Lex put that in an ad and he doesn't realize how important that is.
I do wonder, though.
Not that he would, but.
Right. I do wonder, why is the Daily Planet running an ad for a person who's a convicted felon, like is in prison, and they still run ads for this guy?
I mean, I guess you just think that it's his, it's a company, and although his name might be attached to it, it's still a business with, regular innocent people that are working for it, and they've got to make money. I mean, that would be my thought. But yeah, I think McDuffie's take on the Lex story, I think it works better for us to reach that end where Lex does get the powers of Superman, but then he realizes
the weight of the power.
And exactly what Superman experiences every day. And that just
it humbles him.
It humbles him, yeah. Even though he loses his power at that exact moment. Once he realizes all of that, he's lost that power. But yeah, the fact that he's realizing just exactly how Superman sees the world and why Superman, which is the whole point of All-Star Superman.
Right.
Why Superman is Superman.
Right.
And I think it's just great.
Yeah.
Moving on, we talked about Lois finding out. What did you think about in the movie Superman is the one that tells her, and this time I'm talking about him dying.
Right.
That in the movie it's Superman who tells her, but in the comic it's actually Quantum.
I liked that Superman told her a lot more. I get it, but the fact that he was trying to be more honest with her and telling her like, hey, I'm Clark Kent, also I'm dying. I feel like that really showed maturity in Superman in a way that maybe she could have trusted him more. Whereas I think that would have been it would have been pretty heinous to hear that a person you love is dying from somebody who you barely know.
Well, I do like the way that it is handled in the comic where Quantum tells her and he goes, I'm out of place here. This is probably something I shouldn't do, but I feel you have the right to know.
Yeah. Because he should have told her.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree though. If you're going to condense some stuff down, having Superman be the one that tells her, and I agree with you that it does, help with that. Just kind of Superman, just wanting to take care of everything before he's gone.
Right.
He doesn't want that.
He doesn't want to leave any stone unturned.
Yeah. He doesn't want Lois to always be thinking or have any negative thoughts about him, which I like. We mentioned Solaris earlier. This was another thing I made note of was, again, a change in the script. Right when Superman is pretty much about to completely take out Solaris, Solaris begs for mercy. I mean, he just says the word, mercy. In the movie, Superman says, I don't think I have any left, and punches him. In the comic, he says, "You'll live," and then
Yeah.
punches him. Those to me are two completely different takes.
Oh, yeah.
And I admit the comic one I think is better.
I agree. I feel like that goes more in line with what Superman's like whole way, like his whole reason for being is he is a merciful, just, superhero. He wants to see people, and I like that better than the "I'm gonna let you die" kind of attitude of the
and that's the way
movie.
it comes across in the movie is I don't have any left, so I'm just going to take you out. Whereas saying "you'll live" is Superman knowing, look, I know what you are. I know, what your ability is. I know that doing this is not actually going to kill you, but it is going to stop you for now.
Right.
So I did like that a little bit better because, again, like you said, that is the whole point of this story is what makes Superman Superman, and him being vengeful
Is not
Superman. Yeah. I mean, he gets angry in both cases once Solaris kills his pet Sun Eater, which is understandable.
his pet plot device.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah. Let me ask you, is there any moment from the comic book that you wish had been adapted into the movie?
Like I said, the moment with I liked the flashback scene where he goes back to young Clark and gets to say goodbye to Jonathan in that moment. I thought that was a pretty powerful thing, and I think it also could have fed the story well. Like it's a tough one because it is kind of a story that just, as much as this whole story is a one shot, that's almost its own whole thing all by itself.
Yeah. That was essentially what each of these individual issues were. Yeah.
But it did feel nice to think that, like, if Superman could have gone back and done anything without changing his history at all, if he could have gone back to do anything, he would have gone back to say goodbye to Jonathan.
Yeah, I agree. So mine is actually something that I think they could have put into the movie without really affecting it at all. And that is a single page. It is one page in the comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a page that people, if they follow comic book stuff, they probably see this page on social media all the time. I know I do. But it is essentially what I will call Reagan's page. It is when Superman saves the young girl from committing suicide.
Yeah.
I really wish that was in the movie. Because that one page is the complete idea of Superman.
Yeah.
It is Superman as a symbol of hope.
Yeah.
Well,
it's in a moment where all these things are happening, and he's got so many different things he could have gone to do, and all of these other things would have probably given him a lot more, recognition. People would have seen him. And no, this was a private, quiet moment.
Yeah.
And that is what he chose because he felt that that was where he was most needed.
And the line, "You're stronger than you think."
Yeah.
That I really, 30-second part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish that was in the movie. It is one of the best moments in the comic, in my opinion. I think we've covered everything for the most part. I do want to ask you the question, though. Do you think Superman dies?
No, I don't. Just because, like you've said 100 times before, Superman never dies.
Yeah. But again, this is a one-shot. This is
Yeah.
not connected to the main universe. I mean, this is essentially a story from beginning to end, and it's done.
Well, you just said it a minute ago. Superman is hope. So he went to the sun to fix it, to give the world hope for a better future. And who's to say there's not also hope that he'll be back again?
I don't know. Part of me wonders, does Superman return, or is it through the Superman 2 that Dr. Quantum is created that allows Superman to continue?
Yeah.
Because we know even in this story, he has descendants.
Yeah. But also they allude to the fact that one of his descendants is with Lois.
Well, so I wanted to bring that up. So we've got Cal Kent, who, when Lois sees Cal Kent in the holographic image, she mentions how much he looks like one of her relatives.
Dad.
Yeah, her dad. And so that is implied that he is also a descendant of Lois. But then there's a moment later in the story where Superman tells Lois it could never happen. Our biological chemistry would not allow us to have children.
But they definitely may have been intimate with each other while she had Superman powers.
Maybe. Or again, like I said, there's a chance that this whole Superman 2 thing is the way they work it out. And again, you know, him essentially meeting a future version of himself, and because he also talks with that unknown Superman who ends up being him.
The way I interpreted that was that the Clark that you're following in that story is a Clark of the past, not the Clark that we've been reading about. And the unknown Superman is the Clark from the storyline that we've been following. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, no, I see where you're getting that. I'm just thinking more about at the beginning when he's showing Lois the stuff. We see the unknown Superman. He talks about he's from the, 81st century or whatever it is that he's from. So that gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
But
there were a few things where I'm just like, what?
Yeah. So let's just go ahead and get into it. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. Go ahead, Bethany. What say you?
So for the most part, I enjoyed it. It was a good story. I liked all of the Greek mythology that was sprinkled throughout. I enjoyed, Lois's part where she got to be a superhero. I hated that most of her story got eaten up by a bunch of dudes trying to compete for her to win her, as though she is a prize to be won. But she was an interesting character. The characters had interesting arcs and stories, but in the comic there was a lot that could have been trimmed. So I'm gonna say it's a stack it for me.
Okay. I think, because I have a hard time separating it from just the story, I go bag it, because All-Star Superman, this is Superman.
Right.
This shows why Superman is who he is, what Superman is in the face of anything. I mean, at his most vulnerable, he does not give up. He does not quit. Where many people would just,
even when he dies, he says, nah, never mind.
Yeah.
Let me keep going a little bit longer.
There's so many people that when faced with, such a horrible thing, they don't know what to do. Superman says, I'm not going to let this bother me at all. If anything, I'm going to make sure that my legacy, it stays intact as to what it is, and that the entire world will know that even though I could not continue to be here, I made the world a better place.
Right. He chooses to love deeper and speak sweeter.
Yeah, which we get the whole, the last will and testament of Superman that he makes it towards the end, that in the comic, you just see that narration going on through those final moments. And I will admit, the movie cannot match the depth and the emotion that the comic did. I mean, again, Morrison and Quitely, it was decades of mythology that they're trying to cram into 12 issues. Duffy and Bruce Timm and Sam Liu, they did their best and they condensed it into 76 minutes. And to me, it's a good 76 minutes of the story. And some of the comic doesn't work in a movie. As much as I love the Earth Q stuff, I don't see how you could put that into a movie and it makes sense.
Any sense.
Yeah. Because they kept going back and forth, showing you something that was happening in Earth Q.
And then they would have a panel it would be a panel right next to its Earth Q, and then what's going on? What's Superman doing today?
Yeah. But it's a bagger for me. I do want to ask one more though, since this is kind of a contained story. What do you think people should do first? should they read it or should they watch it?
That's a really good question.
Because do you think watching it might give more of an interest into reading it? Or do you think this is one of those cases where you need to read it because you'll understand the movie better?
I mean, my philosophy when it comes to anything is I would much rather read it first because I feel like you get a more complete image of what's being told. I feel like when you read something or when you watch something before you read its version, it makes you sit there the whole time while you're reading it going like, okay, but when is this going to happen? Okay, but when is this going to happen? Which, yes, you do during a movie, but it's a lot shorter of a time to watch a movie than it is to read a book.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to say read it first.
Okay. Because that was kind of where that question came from, is watching it more of a, let me give you just kind of an overall, because that's what I think McDuffie does. Let me give you an overall kind of Cliff Notes condensed version of this story. And if you want more detail, you can then go to the comic.
I don't know, because I feel like there were enough details in the movie. Yes, he trimmed out a lot, but I don't think it was enough to he didn't condense the actual plot, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like the character arc was still complete. You didn't have a brushing over of, Lex's turn from, megalomaniac to understand. That's still pretty in-depth. I feel like the stuff that was edited out was stuff that really didn't progress the story forward. It just was another example of hey, here's what Superman would do in this situation. Hey, here's what and that doesn't change. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I'm torn about that question as to whether you should read it first or watch the movie. I think that if it would work either way. If you've read All-Star Superman, you watch the movie, yeah, you'll have those moments where you're like, oh, well, they didn't do this, or oh, they did this slightly different. And again, I say slightly different because I think everything that McDuffie
included is pretty true
to the comic. There's just the minor little changes. So I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Whereas looking at it the other way, if you were to watch the movie, like I said, I think that could peak a little bit. This is probably coming more from if you are a comic book fan.
Right. If
you were to watch the movie, I think that could pique a little bit more interest into, well, I'm curious as to how this is more elaborate in a 12-issue, 2-year run versus this, like I said, 76-minute movie. So that was my thought. But
yeah. At the end of the day, make the decision that works best for you. And there's not a wrong decision. It's just what you like better.
No. I said bag it to the movie. I will say bag it to the comic as well. It's a great work. Again, it is considered one of the greatest stories about Superman ever written. So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. This was our 99th episode of a full review episode. So in 2 weeks, we've got our episode number 100, where we are going to go back to where it all started for this podcast and discuss Superman the movie. That was episode number 1 with Tim and I, and now I've got a whole group of my co-hosts that will come together, and we are going to discuss this great movie. Bethany, of course, will rejoin us for that one as well. And then we've got the Jeopardy episodes that are happening. Hopefully you're enjoying those and seeing who is going to take the title of the most knowledgeable of my co-hosts. Or, as I also say, just the one that can play Jeopardy the best is really what it comes down to. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Rate and review the show. Before today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.